Paul, how are you?
Bob Chantal, it's wonderful to see you, man. It's been a while.
It has. It's been since I've actually seen you, at least 12 years, I would guess. I think you were in LA. You had Greg and I
Yep,
over for dinner,
yep.
which I was talking to him recently. He remembered that too. He had a great time.
That was more like
Um,
20 years ago, Bob, but we'll leave it at
oh,
that.
geez. I got to tell you, it really does slip away.
I was in LA
I'm
in
going to,
97, 98, so that was probably when it was.
okay. Wow. That was a long time ago. But just to give you the overview, what I'm doing here, it's kind of a hobby, kind of a way to reconnect with everybody, people I haven't seen in a long time, and really to say thank you to each person for the things that they brought to my party, Bob's Bubble. Okay, and I can tell you, for you, aside from always the technical when we were editors and sharing information, which was always greatly appreciated. Um, I remember you reached out first to sort of invite me into the circle. I think you guys were going to Hunan for lunch and a beer or something, and I was like, new, and I was like really intense and nervous, trying to get things going. You said, "Bob, come on out. This the work will remain. Come out with us," and you did, and really that just opened things up. So thanks for that, and for presenting your California cool, your blonde hair, your surfer kind of look, and the that black Volvo you had. I thought was really cool.
That's a sweet little
So
car.
it was. So that's kind of where we're at. And I guess I ask people to, and I also tell people this is going to be lightly edited because it's not designed as a job for me. I mean, basically, I'll edit a few things out, but basically, it is what it is. And so I guess I would start by saying, who was Paul Sparrow before I knew you? Where were you born? Education, parents, that kind of thing.
So I grew up on Long Island, on the South Shore, beach boy, going to Fire Island, had boats and sailboats, and my father was a scientist. My mother was a scientist. They were at Cave National Laboratory in the little town we lived in, had a lot of scientists, and so a number of kids my age, we all sort of grew up together. We were the lab kids, and it was a very privileged, not particularly wealthy. It was very middle class. My dad was a scientist. You don't make much money, but uh, it was a wonderful life looking back on it. The access to the beach and to boats and to the utter complete freedom we had. Um, at 13 years old, I was sailing across, a 5 mile bay in a 13-foot sunfish with nobody
Wow.
paying any attention to me whatsoever. And if it got dark before I came home, no one would even notice. So
That was parenting back in the 60s.
parenting 1960s. I had three brothers, two older, one younger, all of whom were uber achievers. I was the black sheep in the family, and it was interesting. I went to Stony Brook for 1 year and then dropped out and played in a rock and roll band, really bad band, and I was working landscaping and playing in these bad Long Island bars at night, and decided I needed to go. If I wanted to be serious about music, I needed to go back to school. So I went back to Stony Brook for a year and then transferred out to UC Santa Cruz. And the 2 years in Santa Cruz were really, like, in many ways, the best years of my life. Was I'd already gotten all of the sort of requirements out of the way, so I basically took nothing but music classes. There was an electronic music studio there. I was really into electronic music. I had my own synthesizer. So and it was Santa Cruz. I mean, in the 70s. So,
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
It was a pretty wonderful time. And then I went to graduate school in the Center for Contemporary Music at Mills College in Oakland, and lived up in the Bay Area. And my first experience in visual media, everything I'd done was electronic music and performance art. Was that the boyfriend of one of the dancers in one of my performance pieces was working on this documentary for his degree at San Francisco State on the elephant seals down at Año Nuevo, and he needed a sound guy. So I said, sure, I'll do that. Good experience. I have a lot of recording experience in the recording studios. I'd never really worked with a Nagra before. But so we go down there, and
Oh, it was with a Naga. Okay,
oh,
yeah,
this is old
yeah.
school. This is 19,
Crystal Sync, yeah.
yeah, this is 1978, 79. So we go down there, and I've got the Nagra strapped around me and the headphones and the big long stick and the mic at the end. And we're going down the beach, and he's got the tripod and the old Bolex film, 16 millimeter film camera. And he's shooting, and I'm trying to record sound. All of a sudden, he starts running down the beach. And I'm like, really? Where are you going? And he's screaming something which I can't hear. So I turn around, and there's a 3-ton bull elephant seal charging at me, maybe 15 feet away from me, full speed, eyes red, nose. So I go chasing after him down the beach, the headphones flopping, the Nagra crawling everywhere. And he jumps up on this sort of sand dune to get out of the way, and this elephant seal comes crashing to the ground right where I'd been standing. So that was my first experience in visual media.
And that did not deter you, huh?
Well, it was a detriment, shall we say? But when I first went to college, I wanted to be a marine biologist. Family of scientists. I was going to be a marine biologist. So all of a sudden, here I am being Jacques Cousteau, but as the filmmaker, not as the scientist. And then over the next 2 years on this project, I went from being the sound guy to editing film to doing the musical soundtrack, to helping write the script. And so it was like a condensed sort of, master's program in film studies. And then I saw that they were advertising for an editor at KPIX. And so I showed up. I was interviewed by Ann Miller. She was a little skeptical, I think, of me. I lied. I said, "Oh yeah, I've done lots of editing, video editing. Sure, I've done that." She goes, "Okay, well, we'll give you a piece to test out. This was for Hot Streak or kids, the kids show,
Yeah.
the weekly kids show." And so she goes, "Okay, they shot this footage of a baseball card convention here in town. Come in tonight, and we'll let you work on one of the edit rooms, and we'll see what you come up with." So I'm like, "Oh, sure."
Yeah, like an edit room you've never worked in, system
Nothing.
it's like, a little pressure, huh?
Knew absolutely nothing about it. And so I cut this piece, with the manual on my lap. Was that old Umatics, those 3/4 inch clunky
Yeah.
Datatron editing system, just awful. So it was a learning experience, but I got the job, and it was,
You are and must have been a very quick study, because I remember Greg and I were amazed at how fast you would cut your shows. I mean, you were cutting a half an hour in the same time that Greg and I were cutting 4 or 5 minute pieces. And it's like, how the hell does he do this? I mean, so you must have been a quick study. And I think you probably had a better sense for what it needed to be, because I think, I went too far in. It's like every edit really mattered. And it's like, I would, the syncopated rhythm against my music of the flashing light. Stuff I would think was great, and I would spend an hour tweaking. It's like that didn't matter. It really didn't matter. So I think you got that, and my sense is that you knew how to make the right moves and when to make them, because I think you started doing some directing at KPIX too.
yep.
And then we all went separate ways, and then you reemerged as the showrunner to me, on how'd they do that,
Right.
And then I know that I lost you from there, and then you end up in the academic world, which we'll get to. So how was it just a natural instinct, or was it just impatience, or how did you decide when to make your moves in life to get you kind of where you are now?
A lot of it's fate, random opportunities. I had been around a lot of technology. I had edited, audio tape previously. I was a storyteller. I've always sort of been a storyteller. Even my weird avant-garde music stuff, it was always a story that I was trying to tell. And so I think I had some of those skills, which are really important in an edit room. I've always been super fast at everything. I was the kid in the class that was always the first to turn in his test. Often got a lot of the questions wrong, but I was the first to turn in the test. After Entertainment Tonight came out, and you sort of started seeing this shift towards the more sophisticated, single source, syndicated half-hour programs for that prime access, there was a little bit of writing on the wall that, not sure KPIX can continue to support 150 people in their programming department.
Right.
Plus, my first wife, wanted to move back to Alexandria, Virginia, where she grew up. So uh, I got a job working for USA Today on TV. That was actually the transition job, which was
Okay.
a short-lived daily, syndicated news magazine based on the newspaper. Uh, Very, very high profile people, Grant Tinker from NBC and Steve Friedman and, four anchors, a $25 million studio. It was like, you know, Nirvana, and the show was a disaster.
Wow.
And like a lot of things in life, you learn more from the mistakes than you do from your successes. And it really taught me a lot about show running and leadership, even though I started out just like as the cover story producer, as like a segment producer, and then people were leaving in such droves that I got promoted up real quickly, became the coordinating producer, essentially running all of the segment producers. Um, and in the 18 months it was on the air, it had 5 executive producers.
Oh wow.
So
That's television.
it was a disaster. But then when USA Today went off the air, that's when I went to America's Most Wanted, and again started out as coordinating producer and became co-executive producer. So and America's Most Wanted was a very interesting experience. That kind of interactive television where you have, the power of broadcasting. You put a guy's picture on the air, phone rings, cop takes the data. 20 minutes later, the guy's in custody. you know,
No.
and it's incredible. And you're exposed to the absolute worst sides of humanity.
Yeah.
And there were times when it got really hard to deal with.
Really.
But because you're reading these case files. Do we do the child rapist or the mother rapist or the grandmother killer, or it's like,
Yeah, and then the police footage that you
oh
have access to see that you don't want to see.
yeah,
I mean, I went through some of that on a show with Steve Durgan.
yeah.
But yeah, I get it.
So that was tough. And then they canceled America's Most Wanted in whatever it was, '96. And at that point, I thought, maybe it's time to try LA. And I got the job as executive producer for the Learning Channel show, How'd They Do That? And LA, LA and I just didn't get along very well.
Yeah, I love it. I know you never did.
I was never an LA guy. I was working for Telepictures. It was a tough experience. I learned a lot again. Actually being a number one, being a showrunner in a big studio system like that, you really learn how the business works, how nasty it is, the contract negotiations, all that sort of stuff. And then that show got canceled. We finished our run with Learning Channel, and I came back to Washington to work for the Discovery Channel to do a show called the Eco Challenge with none other than Mark Burnett, who at that point wasn't Mark Burnett. He was just a guy producing these race shows for Discovery Channel, and that was spectacular. 8 weeks in Morocco, the Atlas Mountains, the desert. We had 100-man crew scattered over 50 different locations, following these racers through the wilderness. It was like peak television. It was just, and you were in Morocco.
Oh wow, yeah.
But when we got back, there was a real push for me to come out and back to LA and be Mark Burnett's partner in this series. But my wife and I wanted to have a baby. So we adopted a little baby girl. And I said, you know what, I'm not going to go back to working 100-hour weeks and being on the road 6 weeks at a time. I want to,
Yeah.
I want to be here for her. So
I want to have life. My life. Yeah.
So I took a job working for this museum called the Newseum in Washington. And
I remember that. I came to visit you with my brother, and he still remembers that. We had a great time. You showed us around. Yeah.
it was a great experience. I was there for 16 years, sort of a radical departure. And it was absolutely no regrets. Apparently, Mark Burnett went on to some success later on in life.
Apparently.
But it was the transition. It was a very specific career transition. I mean, I took a huge pay cut, giving up all that stuff, but zero regrets. That museum opened in 2007, and it was pretty spectacular. and was very successful from a audience point of view. The people loved it, especially young people. Lots of media, lots of interactivity. But the financial model was a disaster. It just didn't work. And so I was there for, like I said, 16 years. But the last couple of years, it was pretty obvious that you know there were rounds after rounds of cutbacks. And I can tell you, as an executive, there's nothing worse than having to lay people off, especially people who
Yeah.
you know, they're gonna have a hard time finding a job. Maybe they're the sole breadwinner in their family, or they got a sick kid, or and it was gut wrenching. And I had health issues around the stress, and it was just awful. So that's when I said, okay, well, at that point, 2015, I said, all right, I got one more job in me. What can I do? And when I saw the opportunity to be the director of the FDR library, I said, now that's a job that has integrity, that has, real significance. You're part of a National Archives, the cultural institution that, is so important to preserving our past. And it was the greatest job I ever had. I mean, I just loved it. I mean, the facility itself, the presidential library, is run by the National Archives, but it's actually on the same property with his home where he lived up, where he grew up. And I did a lot of writing when I get there. I mean, I'd been writing my whole life as a producer, as a showrunner, as a museum sort of semi-curator for the interactive and the exhibits that I developed. But that's very different than trying to really write a book.
Right.
So when the pandemic hit, they shut down the library, everything else. We sort of go into these 2 years of darkness, and I had some real serious health issues.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Yeah, I over the years I've had 5 back surgeries, so that's not fun. But in 2021 I had my 4th back surgery. I had 2 weeks before I went in for surgery, I found out I had prostate cancer. And then in the interim between the surgery and starting radiation treatment for the prostate cancer, I had Lyme disease. Like put me in the
No.
emergency room, Lyme disease.
Really?
So, I said, you know what, this job, I love this job, but I don't know if I have it in me. At that point, not knowing what was going to happen for the radiation treatment, I thought I could fake my way through it. I didn't tell anybody. And after the second or third radiation treatment, it was like, holy shit. It just totally kicked my ass. And so, I announced that I would be retiring at the end of the year. And it was a shock to everybody because everybody knew how much I loved it. So it was very hard to leave. But it was also, for me, it was the right time. I wanted to have enough time in retirement to really enjoy it. Now the good news is my health is pretty good. I had to have another back surgery since then, but my health seems pretty good. Who knows, what's going to happen. And so when I left, I started writing this book.
And how long does it take to write that book?
Well,
Roughly 2 years.
yeah, well, in some ways I've been working on this book, for 5 or 6 years, sort of in my head. The first draft of it I wrote, which was called Words That Change the World, was very focused on language and the rhetoric of FDR's speeches and his leadership, and Eleanor's speeches and her leadership. And it was pretty niche, let's just say. And like all the publishers passed on it. They're like, yeah, we're not interested in this. So then, I decided, okay, well, I'll do what they call a slice of history, which is you take one small piece of the story and you sort of delve into that, because I was still interested in how FDR used persuasive language to do all the things that he accomplished. And so I'm looking at that period from September 1939, when Hitler invades Poland, through sort of Pearl Harbor and America's entry into the war. And so the book is entitled Awakening the Spirit of America, FDR's War of Words with Charles Lindbergh and the Battle to Save Democracy. And it really looks at this sort of point counterpoint between these two forces, and FDR's effort to try to get Americans to accept their role as a superpower, as the defender of democracy in a world confronted with fascism.
So, and when does it actually available?
Comes out June 4th.
Great,
So it's coming
great.
out soon, and then I'll be going on a tour. I'm going to start on the East Coast. I'll be hopefully eventually visiting all of the presidential libraries because I still have friends there. It's got a couple of good pre-publication reviews. So and it's certainly a very topical subject. The
Right.
argument of whether or not America should support a beleaguered ally being ruthlessly bombed by a crazy dictator next door. It has some resonance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's move through a couple of other things that I wanted to make sure I asked you
Well,
about.
before you ask me the next question, I want to talk with you about Cozumel. Um, you know,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
one
yeah.
of our, one of my great memories of you, and one of I think was a terrific experience is when we went down to Cozumel in Mexico to go scuba diving, and this sort of adventure that was. And then of course I ended up going back there with Evening Magazine, or I can't remember. I may have gone there first, and then we went together. I can't remember what the timing was. We went twice, right?
We went
Just
once.
once.
But I remember it was very impromptu because we were talking outside my edit room, and you said, "Yeah, I'm going to go to Cozumel." And you started to describe it. I had never been out of the country, I don't think, and I certainly hadn't experienced snorkeling or even scuba diving at all. And it was like, well, why don't you come? And it was the first time I ever said, well, why don't I? So within like a few days, we were on a plane together, and it was fabulous. It opened my mind up to travel and to. It was just a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun. And then we went to Chichen Itza,
Right. Oh,
and
that was an amazing day. That was really amazing.
you remember we flew in on that little plane
Yep.
into the jungle, and I mean, it didn't seem to be much more than 3 feet on each side of the wings.
I don't think it was much more. Wasn't there a pig on the runway or a goat or something? They were like chasing the animals off the runway as we're like, yeah, it was.
It was wild, but that was a great trip. And I haven't done any scuba since. I really enjoyed the reef dive
Yeah.
because 15 feet was enough for me as a newbie. When we tried to go deeper, I had some problems. I don't know if you remember with
Yeah,
that.
a lot of people do with they can't get their ears to clear.
Yeah, I couldn't. And in fact, I came up with a nosebleed and everything else. I said, you know what, reef dive was fine, and so I did that again. And I've enjoyed snorkeling in Hawaii multiple times since, but that was my first time,
Yeah.
and that was a great trip. It really was.
Yeah, and
So
I went with I'm trying to think. I think it was Mondo and to we did a trip to Cozumel in Mexico City with I think it was with Jan for one of those evening trips. And I remember the day we were supposed to go scuba diving. We had underwater gear, we rented all this sort of stuff. And the night before, we'd been at a bar and I was drinking, I don't know, rum and cokes or something with ice, and I woke up with the worst case of Montezuma's Revenge.
oh no.
And I'm literally lying on the dock, just sick as a dog, But it's like, all right, put the gear on, full life. I don't know how this is going to end up, but I do remember it as one of the toughest days of my professional career.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I have experienced it once or twice, and it is not fun. So,
Yeah.
kudos to you for pushing through and still.
Well,
The show must go on, right?
that's when having a good crew makes all the difference in the world, right? The people who pick up and make it happen. Knowing you're not really up to the job, and helping you out. I mean, that was one thing about the evening family is that you always sort of felt that everybody had your back.
Yeah, you let people do what they do, like Mondo's work and Parmalee's work.
Yep.
I mean, just stunning.
They were
I mean,
amazingly good.
Yeah, I mean, they were. It was a great team. I got to tell you, of all the teams I worked on, that was one of had the best staff all around. I think.
Well, we were inventing it as we were going. I mean, in many ways, it was the sort of the birth of this, freewheeling video cameras, fluffy hosts, do whatever you want. You can do Chocolate Factory, you can do an earthquake in Mexico City. It's the full spectrum, and it was a remarkable amount of freedom. I mean, you had an executive producer. Melanie did everything she could to keep us under control, but it was not easy.
Well, look, I think we while we were talented, we were probably hard to manage.
Oh my God, we were
Um,
we were a pain in the ass. I guarantee it.
if she ever sees us, she'd probably be happy to hear somebody admitted it. But let me just look at a couple of other things here. Um, it's just a general. You look back to your. What would you tell your younger self? What have you learned in this process of life? I mean, any sage advice or just something you would have done differently, or are you pretty happy with just the way it's gone?
Well, to quote the famous philosopher Taylor Swift, you need to calm down. I mean, I think if there was one thing I would tell myself, I was very intense. I was a pretty intense person the whole time, and I think I took things very seriously and very personally at times,
Yeah,
and it caused unnecessary conflict. Uh, and again, another good piece of advice someone gave me once was, Paul, it doesn't matter if you're right, right? If you insult people in the process, then you're going to lose anyway.
right.
And it was like,
That's good.
how do you learn to be a good partner with people? How do you learn to be a good teammate? How do you learn to be part of a group where you bring your best and you try to get the best out of other people, but you do it in a way in which everyone feels fulfilled rather than threatened or challenged or demeaned or whatever. And I have a very sarcastic sense of humor. I can be arrogant in my manner. A lot of times I don't even realize when I make people feel bad. I think I've matured over the years and I've gotten much better at it. And as you rise in the leadership, ladder, it becomes more and more important to be aware of that. When you make a snarky comment to somebody who works for you, of course they're not going to think it's funny. They don't know whether you're serious or whether you're demeaning them or whatever. And so you have to become much more aware of the fact that, you know, don't ever say anything in public that could embarrass someone. If you need to say something to someone or criticize someone, do it in private. If you want to praise them, great, do that in public all the time.
Right.
But don't criticize them or do anything that could make them feel, bad in front of other people. It's just a terrible technique. And of course, the television business is full of people whose whole careers are based on beating the hell out of other people.
Yeah, I mean, people are more sensitive than you know. I mean, everybody puts up the face like they're impervious, but they're not,
No,
and that's, I think, a good thing to know. Uh, we should probably all have the wisdom we have now back in our late 20s, 30s, and 40s.
well, and
But that's
it's
life.
gotten even more important now because I think for the boomers, the Gen Zs, are much more sensitive and much more um, reactive to negative comments and to communicating with people in a way that they find demeaning, or people making jokes or things that we would have thought were funny that are now totally unacceptable.
Hmm.
And I think it's
Hmm.
important that each older generation, as they're gradually exiting the stage, you know, be respectful of the fact that rules change. The same way the rules change for us between our parents and us, the rules are changing between us and our children's generation, and we have to honor that and try to learn from it. And say, okay, things that I used to be able to say and do, can't say and do anymore. And
Right.
I think that's real important.
Good. I'm actually pretty good. Just anything else you want to ask me or tell everybody something that maybe we don't know about you? Anything, just open mic here.
I think when Dan started getting sick, and the chat group got set up, and then when Dan died, which was a real tragedy. I mean, Dan was one of those characters that everybody liked. He just was
Yeah.
that kind of personality that he left a long trail of friendships. And there was sort of a reconnecting. I mean, I think a group of you who are still on the West Coast have stayed in closer contact than I have with everyone. But it was really, I thought, touching that people would express how they felt about Dan, how they felt about each other, about the Evening Magazine group that was there, the sort of bonds we formed so long ago, that
Right.
were so easily reconnected because those bonds were based on some real terrific experiences. And I was very moved by that whole process. I wish I could have gone to the memorial service and all those things, but a little bit of a trek for me. But I do think it
Yeah.
reflects something about the authenticity of our experience. We've all gone
Hmm.
on to do lots of other things, and yet there was something about that time and place that formed these bonds that we're still talking about today.
All right, Paul. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob.